This evening, we look forward to hearing a presentation on bell and route optimization from Chief Operations Officer Jeff Connell. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, members of the board, community. With me, I'm Jeff Connell, Chief Operating Officer, and here is Desiree Fisher. She is our Director of Transportation. And thank you for the opportunity to present to you this concept that we've had about doing some standardization of our bell times in coupling with a routing optimization program that hopefully will have a number of benefits we'll go through here. Just wanted to kind of set the stage that, as we went through this, when Desiree came to us, not quite a year ago, she recognized that kind of based on our experience looking at other bus routing systems, that this was not a very well optimized system. Just looking at, and we'll go through that data, but as we look at it, we think about, what would be the best use of a driver and how would we get the most out of any one driver? Because as you know, the nation continues to experience a bus driver shortage, and we are not immune to that. We are not looking to put anybody down, but we would say neighboring districts are shortening their bus opportunities for their students. They are doing rolling blackouts. And so the idea that if we don't do something, we too could be in a situation where the general education routes that we run would have to change in some way, or we would not be able to keep them all running like we have been. So with that, we identified this opportunity, we hired a consultant, and we put together this program. And we said one of the things you can look at that's necessary in order to optimize a bus routing system is some standardization of your bell times. And those would be the start and end times of our schools. So with that, we'll jump right in. Okay, just some definitions. We'll try not to be too jargon heavy about this. But just in case these come up, you can refer back to this and have them available to you. Looking at tiers, one complete cycle of the buses out on the roads, picking up the students, dropping them off, then they do it again for the second tier and hopefully a third. And our times when we're actually picking up students versus when we're just deadhead, which is just drive time to get to where the students are. All of these are part of the analysis that goes into how long a bus route takes. So this is the slide that we like best, right? This is Pooter's bus route map. And so it gets built one piece at a time. We have at one time a maximum of 122 buses out there running routes and picking up students. That would be we'll show you that slide in a bit. That's the middle tier of our morning runs. Our buses are crawling their way through neighborhoods and driving our streets and arterials every day. And the point of this slide that we always say kind of looks like somebody spilled a plate of spaghetti is that this is a very dependent system. All of these pieces interact. They happen at different times. They go to different schools, and they have different drivers that cross over from one spot to the next, all kind of fitting that, how long can the student be on the bus? What's the capacity of the bus? What schools do they need to go to? What are the bell times that they need to meet so that they can do the pickups that they need to? And all that results in a map that looks something like this. And so the other piece about this is if you were to take one of the buildings offline or remove a stop, you can see that in the scheme of a bus routing system, that wouldn't change much, right? We need to look more broadly at how all of our buses move through the routing system. So these are the advantages that we identified. Why do this, right? So we're going to go through the staffing challenges, the bell times not being structured, how well we support athletics, events, and music. Of course, the financial piece is really important. And the other piece not mentioned, but we will talk more about it, is how do we recruit and retain drivers and make this a job worth having. Each route costs us about $80,000 per year. Now, most of that cost is in the driver, but that does also include fuel, depreciation, maintenance, upkeep, all the other ancillary expenses of running a busing system. Excuse me. And so each route that we're able to eliminate, not just from one tier, right? We would have to eliminate that bus route from tier 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon. But if we can do that successfully, then we've eliminated the need for the driver that goes with that route. So when we say route, we mean all 6 routes in a day. Just to be really clear that in order to achieve the savings, you have to get to that level of efficiency. The other piece is charter buses, right? So because we have enough drivers to meet, right, our current maximum number of drivers on the road of 122, give or take. But we'll talk more about our staffing challenges in a moment, but we don't have any buffer. And so because we don't have that buffer, all of our drivers are out on buses generally between, right, 6 in the morning and 9:45-ish. And then again by 1:30, 1:45, they're back getting ready for their afternoon runs. And so that opportunity for us to support all of the other driving and student transport needed in the middle of the day for athletics and interschool transfers for programs and athletics and everything else is really a challenge. And because we can't meet that, we're paying charter bus companies to meet it for us because we still want the students to have these opportunities. We're only trying to point out that's a really expensive thing for us to do. We in transportation, supporting the students in the district, we want to provide this transportation. We're frustrated that we're so short drivers and the system that we have that we're not able to. So staff retention, stabilized schedules, part of that goes to us wanting to create a job that allows for an 8-hour or more, if they want it, workday. Because the idea of that 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon works for some people, but it also doesn't work for a lot of people. And that's a real hindrance to our recruiting efforts for bus drivers. Because this is what our system looks like. We took a snapshot of data from October, and these are the number of people who are missing from work, absenteeism, each day. And they're missing from work for a whole variety of legitimate reasons. This isn't like just no-shows, right? These are people who are sick or have a child who is sick or have other appointments and medical and just life, right? I mean, we have 120 plus drivers, so even if 10% are out each day, you can see this is a significant number of people. So how do we cover those routes? Because we said we have 122 maximum routes, we have maybe 120 to 122 drivers, and if we're missing 10 to 20 on any given day, how do we cover those routes? And we cover them because our administrative staff in our transportation department that hold a commercial driver's license, they jump on a bus. Routers and trainers and mechanics and supervisors, managers, and the director herself get on a bus when that's what's needed. So even Desiree in the last week has been on a bus again, now for more than a handful of times this year. And that's creating a lot of pressure on our transportation system to keep it going. We are that close. I can honestly say that if the director of transportation is jumping on a bus, that's the last possible person who holds a CDL who's available to run that route. So it's a difficult system to maintain at our current, staffing levels. And then the consequence of that is then we don't have people available to answer questions and calls. We don't have people able to respond to schools about, a bus being late or a pickup or a child and some issue that's going on. And that's a real struggle because we feel the pain of that customer service missing, and so do the schools. But the truth is, those people are on buses, and that's where our priority is, and we need them to be. Some of the other things, though, impacts on staff, it's difficult for job satisfaction We want that relationship between our bus drivers and students to be robust. We think that's a really important part of a student's day. And with this kind of absenteeism, we're also experiencing 30% attrition,
Yes.
which is astonishing, right? But the truth of the matter is, it takes 2 months to go from walking in the door and saying, I want to be a bus driver, until you can be fully trained and have a CDL with the proper endorsements and be ready to get on a bus. And when you are fully trained and licensed and ready to get on a bus, you also happen to hold a very marketable skill now. And we lose them for other opportunities quite a bit. And so this is a constant turnover for us. Every 2 months, we start a new group. Always, hopefully, as many as we can get, but in the neighborhood of what, 10 to 15?
Yes, we have about 10 right now.
Yeah. So this turnover is also really hard on our system. And so we're trying hard on all of these fronts to make being a bus driver a job worth having in many different ways. Our bell times are not standardized. That's just what we have. And there's a lot of reasons why we've heard this is the way that it is. And we're both relatively new in the grand scheme of things, just shy of a year for me. But we have, as we look at our bell times across the system, some are in what we call the first tier of transportation, some are in the second, some just kind of are out there. And there may be lots of reasons why, in terms of how those got set. There might have been needs at the time in a different era of bus drivers and transportation options available, where that was something that transportation could accommodate. It's just not very well standardized, which means it's difficult for us to run the greatest amount of runs per tier so that we maximize each bus driver's time. And we'll show you what that means. And then also, it's not standardized in the PM. So a difficulty would be something like, there's 13 more runs in the PM, which means given the same number of drivers, you need 13 more in the afternoons than you do in the morning. And that kind of imbalance is hard, right? Because we're not using the same drivers, we have to have more in the afternoon available in the morning, and it makes optimization that much more difficult. Another situation that we accept is that we have a significant number of students that have legally recognized transportation requirements, and we are happy to be able to provide that for them. But it is something that, in many instances, makes optimization more difficult for us. So this is one of those limitations that we have to keep in mind as a district, is that if a student is on an ITP, individualized transportation plan, or if they qualify for other special services that include transportation, then we are legally required to transport them, and we do. But it is a limitation on optimization that we had to incorporate into what we're proposing tonight. So as we mentioned this thing about charter buses, ideally, part of the benefit would be we would provide that service in-house. This would keep my bus drivers busy throughout the day for those that want to be. It makes it a more attractive job, and also provides flexibility to the schools, right? Because it's a difficult conversation to say, we can support your field trip, but it's got to be between 10 and 1:30. And we're trying hard to create a lot more flexibility for the schools in this regard. We spend over $400,000 a year on charter buses. And we feel like that's money in transportation that if we could provide the service, that we could save. The financial piece of this, before I jump into the analysis, right? If we can save, as we're proposing, 10 routes, and that means across the whole day, we've eliminated 10 routes, 10 drivers that we wouldn't need to have for that. There's a couple of things we want to make sure we point out. One, that's $80,000 per day, or per year, sorry, per route. So that could be a savings of $800,000. If we can provide our charter bus transportation in-house, that's a savings of another $400,000. This is money that we really are spending every year. This is not necessarily a paper savings. This is real savings that we feel like we could achieve. The other piece of this is that, based on our staffing, as you can see, we're not talking about eliminating any people. We are actually talking, right now, today, we probably have in the neighborhood of 37 vacancies. So as you can see, if we eliminate 10, right, we're not actually eliminating any people. And so that's important to us too. So we're not actually talking about having fewer bus drivers than we have today. We still need to hire more to have our system work, right? So what we did is, we hired First Consulting. They're a branch of First Student, a large national transportation company, and they analyzed our routing system with the goal of optimizing it as much as possible. And we gave them the direction that they could look at bell times because we knew they weren't standardized, and they could propose what they thought might be reasonable to move bell times to achieve this optimization. So really we'll get to the data soon, but that's essentially what they did. They looked at the data, they tried to move our routing system into a 3-tier system as much as they could with the limitations that we've said. This is just a snapshot look at what our current routing system is. 109 for the first tier, 122 for the second, 10 for the third. I can say that's not terribly optimized, right? The ultimate ideal, if we could completely, work from scratch, would be something like 85 first tier, 35 middle, 85 third. And we could, get all the way down to that number of drivers. That's not terribly realistic with all the limitations we have, but just so we see what ideal could look like. And then looking in the afternoon. The number that controls the drivers, right, is that middle tier of the morning, 122. That's how many drivers at one time have to be on the road on a bus. And so the maximum number from any of these tiers is the number that we're really focusing on in terms of trying to get them lowered. So when we have two options and scenarios here to present tonight. Option A and option B. So just for a little grounding, right? Option A is color-coded. 19 schools don't change time at all. 10 schools change 5 to 10 minutes. 14 schools change from 11 to 20. And 6 change 21 to 30 minutes. And color-coded, white, green, yellow, pinkish red. We also on the table for the large sheet that you have has the percentages that this would be. Because if we add up the first two from a 0 to 10 minute change, that's about 59% of the schools experience a relatively small change. And so the bigger change was focused in just a few. Then option B is the same optimization schedule as A. So the only thing that's changed is that all schools in option B were shifted back 5 minutes. So some of the schools had a start time as early as 7:30 in option A. And so the thought was that even though it's not a significant change, we're not pretending that 5 minutes is some great deal here, but it is real time, and 7:30 is pretty early in the morning. So if we can do even 7:35, and we can in transportation, we thought that was at least worth putting forward. There are limitations on that. One of the groups and some feedback from the parents was there's a lot of concern about kids being out in the dark at night. And athletics and other activities after school, staying later was, I don't want to say less palatable, but was something that they were balancing against early mornings. So I'll let you look at the list of schools. We thought it was important that everybody see exactly what the time shift would be for their school. So in summary, looking at the positives, the financial savings are significant. Managing our vacancies and drivers' needs without a reduction in staff is something we feel good about. The limited movement of school bell times, I know that's all very subjective, right? For people who chose their school based on the bell time that it had, this can be a big change. We're here presenting the data because we recognize that. And we know this is a balance of interests and equities and finances and benefits. Some of the things we want to make sure we point out is middle schools are starting earlier, by and large, and that can be a struggle. And some elementary schools are still starting later. And the last thing, because you can look at the data on the big sheets, I think, a little better than on the PowerPoint, is there is a communication strategy. So in addition to going to the district advisory board and getting good feedback from the parents, a lot of things for us to continue to consider, a lot of which has been kind of built into what we've talked about here tonight. We also want to get, of course, the board's feedback tonight in this information session. And depending on that, we have a survey ready to go to the parents tomorrow to get more feedback from virtually everybody who's willing to participate in the survey to help guide us. Our next steps would be to take that information, make whatever changes we need to make, then us as administration will consider the options and bring it back to the board in the first week of March. So with that, I rushed a little bit because I want to give you time for questions, thoughts, and you know,
And
take
before
advantage
we jump into questions, I just want to add to Jeff's comments about the survey, because we walked through bell times there very quickly. Those are available in the packet for tonight for those who want to take a look at them, and they will also be included in the survey as well. So you'll be able to see all of the proposed bell times for every school when you go to take the survey that will be going out tomorrow.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for the presentation, Jeff. Desiree, we appreciate it. So starting off, Kevin, you had some questions.
Couple of comments and questions. First of all, I want to thank you both for doing this work. This is tough. I'm going to maybe punt to Jim and see if he wants to contextualize some of those numbers a little bit more based on a recent contextualizing. If not, that's fine. I don't want to steal his thunder. But I want to note a couple things because I've now had a lot of time to absorb this since the first time since it was presented to us. I think significant to me, some of the things that jump out are with option A, there are 39% of the schools that have zero change whatsoever. And when the color key says 0 to 4, a closer read actually reveals that that's 0. None of those schools have any change. I think that's important. So there is over a third of the schools in option A, zero change whatsoever. The next large bucket, 20% or a fifth of the schools in our district have a 5 to 10 minute window of a change. And so I think that's important as far as the contextualizing. There are a few that have significant changes. We've received some community feedback on those already. So on that note, I do want to make sure that we're being mindful in this work, that we're thinking about households, and I come from one that have parents that both have jobs. In the mornings are always difficult to get kids off, especially when kids go to two different schools. 30-minute adjustment one way or another can significantly change a household's life, their income, their job. Not to just sweep that under the rug and say, I don't have a solution for that, but I think that is something that we need to be mindful of, is that the 5 to 10 minute, negligible. The 30-minute, that could change someone's job. So I just want to point that out. And the other thought that I had, and it was expressed earlier, but I want to reiterate again and maybe get some clarity, and we don't have to have clarity tonight, but something I want to be thoughtful about, is that we are also charging the steering committee, and we just gave them a list of guiding principles, which we worked really hard on. I think that they're undertaking some excellent work. what, if anything, is this going to have to do with their work, and will it have any impact on some of those resolutions or recommendations? And we don't have to solve that tonight. I agree with the urgency of the situation, and again, I hope Jim shares his context, because I think it's meaningful in the work that we're talking about, and these aren't just $80,000 or $40,000 routes. These are salaries that we could be paying people, and I'm very mindful of the Tracy's how we started this night, and that we need to be guarded for those people. As a bus kid growing up, they were every bit as part of my education as my teachers were. So I want to highlight and balance the urgency of the situation, but also be mindful of the impact that could have on the steering committee's work ahead of them, and add one more thing onto their plates as far as them navigating a whole myriad of complicating factors. And I don't have a resolution for that, but I want to just at least voice that thought.
And if I can jump in on that one, Jeff, just as it's a good concern, and one of the things that we had talked about was that this is for 1 year and 1 year only. What the steering committee comes up with for future terms, and that's 25, 26, will make us reconsider everything that is on these bus routes for 25, 26. So what we're looking at here is simply 24, 25, and that is it. Because what the steering committee then comes up with for 25, 26 will shape the way that this is done again. And so I just want to just make clear that this is a 1 year, it's a savings of 1.2 to 1 to 1.5 million for the 24, 25 school year. And then beyond that, we will have to go back to the drawing board essentially. Jeff, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, but I just wanted to reiterate that.
Kristen, that is entirely correct. We will pivot and change with whatever the steering team recommendations are that the district decides to implement. And those changes would then be kind of, worked on through the next school year and ready for the summer of '25 to implement.
All right, other questions? Jess?
Sorry, mine kind of piggybacks, or at least one of mine kind of piggybacks on that. I think as the steering committee does their work, and we do have something proposed for the 25-26 year, I think having this just conversation sooner in the year so that these decisions are made for families, for programming, will be really important, since we should have some sense of what our plan would be for the following year. Hopefully we can make some of these decisions earlier. And then I think one thing that I keep saying is that as we grapple with this, right, I understand this is just for next year and we'll have to re-grapple. As we have to do that, I really want to have some concerted conversation around what is too early to start, what's too late to start, what's too early to end, and what's too late to end. That's not something we are going to solve this year. I understand that. But I do think that's a conversation that we need to have with our community as we have all of these conversations going forward. Thank you.
Jim?
First, I want to say thanks for all the work. I think this is really great stuff. Another comment is the fact that we have managers driving is kind of indicative of a system that just is not healthy and is not a system, you know that it's just going to break down soon. That's really where we're at. So I just wanted to reinforce that point, I guess. You said it, but to me, that just says something's got to change here. And I recognize the pickle you're in on these time slots with middle school starting early versus sports late, right? If you start to slide things too late, you get complaints from the sports crews. Mm-hmm. If you start to slide things too early, we'll get complaints from the middle school parents, and we may already get some. I understand that too. So it is a tricky balance there, and I think you're doing a good job of navigating that. Maybe the last thing, at the district advisory board yesterday, this was one of the things that was discussed. Thank you for presenting there as well to the parents that were in that group. And one of the questions there was, why do we have to do this fall? Why can't we wait until 2025 when we're making other changes? And my response to that parent last night was, we're in a crisis of drivers. It's a crisis, and we need to treat it that way. So we don't want to wait a year to do this. And the driver crisis part is just part of it. We're also getting close to a money crisis, I believe. And I hate to use that word because it sounds a little crazy, but We need ways to save money in the district. That's part of why we're doing the whole effort that we're doing around consolidations and those kinds of things. We need to look under every rock. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing here. I asked our finance gentleman, Dave, what does $1 million really mean, right? You say we'll save between $1 and $1.5 million. $1 million equates to about 10 teachers in the district, or it equates to about 30 paras in the district. Okay, so we need to think about this in those real kind of terms. It's not just, on this big a budget, who cares about $1 million? We care a lot. We need to look under every rock, and I appreciate your doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Other comments? Scott?
Yeah, so thank you for sure for putting this together. This is intense work, and I value your leadership, both of your leadership on this. I think both options, to me, from a board member and a parent, seem pretty reasonable. There are 6 schools in option A that are getting more than 20-minute changes, but it's mostly going from like 8:50 to 8:25. So I don't know if that's going to affect parents commuting as much as it could in other senses. So I do value that. One question I had is just trying to wrap my head around one of your statements was that we're not talking about reducing the number of drivers. We have 37 openings. So if we're not reducing the current drivers, where's the savings coming from? This 800,000 that we're talking about.
Right, because as it turns out, those 37 driver positions are funded, right? We have to budget for them. And so one of the things that finance does is, because we're always kind of perennially short-staffed, we're kind of robbing from Peter to pay Paul. We're taking salary savings to pay charter bus costs, right? Where if we could eliminate both of those, we wouldn't have to budget for those extra 10 positions, and we wouldn't have to write the check to the charter company, then there really is money to be saved there, even though it's not an actual person that's currently being paid.
That's great. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thought that, so I'm glad you were able to clarify that. The last question I had is in the past, before we had turnover and people using us to get their CDL and then bailing out to get a higher paying job, how was it done in the past? What kind of reserve did you have of drivers above and beyond the 122 routes? And was it like a substitute system like teachers have?
Here currently, I'm not really sure how they did it, but where I've come from before, they do a lot of different things with different incentives. A lot of districts I've been in have upped the pay, or they do things like jackets, those when you don't have any accidents, that kind of. So there's a lot of like different incentives. They have big Christmas parties, and I'm not saying that, but that's kind of those little things. That's to keep drivers wanting to come back. And I haven't seen the here, luckily, where they've come to get their CDL and left. I think since I've been here in May, there's only been one.
That's good. No, what I'm getting at is like, besides if you're fully staffed and you don't have supervisors having to run out and take over a route, and somebody calls in sick, like who's the person that's supposed to, like in a perfect system?
Okay.
That's what I mean. It's like
Okay, so currently we have 10 leads. We should have a larger percentage of those lead drivers, and the lead drivers are the ones that would actually take over when someone calls in sick. So right now we only have, we have 9 actually, because one person got promoted, but we should have at least 15 to 20 to have that buffer.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
So I don't have a question so much as like a statement, because as you guys know, like this conversation has really made me struggle with my values, right? Like there's wanting to make sure we don't start too early or end too late, but butting that up against making sure students have a consistent driver that they see every day, and it's the person that they just know they're going to meet, right? Having that consistency is really important. I think making sure all of our kids get to school every day, not having to have rolling blackouts is a value. Limiting our turnover, right? Building community so that you guys aren't having to go out every day. You can actually, have a system that's really working and thriving instead of surviving, right? So I think there's a lot of pieces to this that I think this will be a hard conversation to have, but I think we have a lot of good reasons for why we need to make a shift for next year. And I think I was probably a hard person to convince. So I really appreciate your efforts in sharing more details and sharing the information so that I could be empowered, right? To have enough to really fight for what we need as a system. Because again, is it ideal for students necessarily? Maybe, maybe not. But as far as time goes, there's a whole lot of other things that are ideal. Having that consistent bus driver is imperative. Getting to school every day, if we don't do that, doesn't matter when we start school if you can't even get there. So I really want to appreciate the work you've put in, the amount of context you've provided along the way, and just being open to having the conversation, because I know this is not an easy one, but I really appreciate your effort there. Thank you.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
And I think I'm going to piggyback on what Jess had to say here, which is that if we do have to go to rolling blackouts, I'm really concerned about what that's going to do to our attendance. Attendance is already an issue this year coming out of COVID, and if we aren't providing bus service, I think kids just are not going to be showing up to school. And so I'm not a big fan of that, of having rolling blackouts. I think that's not a good idea at all. And then I would just like to know, Desiree, what happens if you're the last person and there's 2 routes? What's going to happen to that route that doesn't have a driver? What's going to happen?
So let me just start off by putting a little shameless plug in there to my staff and how well my dispatchers and my staff are about covering. So let's say there's 2 routes, there's only 1 person left. A lot of times we can, at times, put the routes together. And unfortunately, I'm being honest, the route would run late, but we would make sure we send out a message to parents through the messenger. We call the school, we let them know, and we do everything in our power to make sure that it doesn't become a continuous thing. Normally people can kind of accept a late once, but not a late all the time. So.
Yeah, and I think the point here is that I don't think this is a good way for a system to run, is always in crisis. Because when you're doing that, a lot of the things that you should be doing are not at the top of the pile because you're on a bus running a route. And we expect you to do, as a supervisor, do the things that we've assigned to you to get done. And I know that probably when you get home or when you get back from your bus route that you have to sit down and make sure that those things get done before you go home. And so I think that running a system in crisis is really hard on the employees. It creates turnover, creates churn, and it also creates more expenses, because I don't know how much it costs to train a driver, but as a former business owner, every time I have to stop and train somebody, it cost me almost $5,000 just to train somebody. And so if I'm constantly doing that, my service is suffering, and my bottom line is really suffering. And so I don't see how we can keep this crisis operation going without trying to do something to create some efficiencies in the system. So I support the work that you guys did there. I think it was really good.
Other comments or questions? I do want to point out, Carl, I'll let you go in just a second. I do want to point out what the rolling blackouts, that other local school districts have had to go to this because of the fact that they don't have enough bus drivers for all of the routes. And so what that essentially means is that every 8th day, you do not have a bus. And I don't know about anybody else here, but I know that there's no way that I would be able to try and figure out which 8 days my kids would have a bus and when they would not. To me, that right there just makes me absolutely crazy. And so I just want to put it out there that when we're talking about rolling blackouts, that's what we're talking about, is the fact that there would be every 8 days or so that there would be no bus. That is not an equitable way to run this transportation system. It's not a fair way to run this transportation system for the kids, for the drivers. for anybody. And I just want to make sure that people understand that that is what we are talking about. We are not talking about, yes, it's difficult, and we are getting to the point, we're getting to the breaking point. And that breaking point may mean that even by the end of this year, we may need to look at that. So I just want people to understand where we are at. So, Jim, go ahead, and then Connor.
Sorry, I just had one more. For context, the number of kids that are bused every day,
Oh, just shy of 9,000.
just shy of 9,000. So we have about 27,000 kids in the district. So about a third of our kids are bused every day, just to get that out there. Thanks.
Go ahead, Connor.
Concur with everybody in the fact that I think it's great work, and yeah, I can support it. I do have some reservations that this is now going to be the second major bus change to schedules that we've done in the last 4 years. And 4 years ago, we had a huge rollout of why that was justified too. I think we're losing the confidence of the public when it comes to start times. Is $1.5 million of savings important? Yes. Is it worth losing the confidence of people in the neighborhoods? Maybe. Do people in our school district, parents in our school district, know this pressing problem with buses? Not at all. I don't think that they're going to learn that until there are rolling blackouts. We can come up with a fantastic communication plan for this, which is going to be needed. But until that bus doesn't show up to pick up your kid, you're not going to realize that it's a problem. It's just going to be another email that we get from the district, and it's going to be, they're changing times. I have to change my schedule. Now, why can I say that? Because I'm going to have to change my schedule. My kids, and I think that the community can handle it. Right? I'm not saying that the sky is falling. But when we continue to flip-flop back and forth on this, people don't see it as the crisis that it is. I support it. I think it's great work. I would say, definitely by the end of this school year, the communication plan has to be the tightest one that we've seen. Why? I still don't think that that's going to be enough. That rolling blackout thing, that would get people to wake up. Now, it would for me. And I do think that in general, with the amount of kids that we're busing and extracurriculars and all of that, just my personal experience in District F, there are too many kids on the bus. I think that we could bump out those zones. Hopefully that may be an option later on when we have to change the schedules again, because after some kind of consolidation, we're going to be right here talking about the same thing again. So when we do that, I think that we should probably take a deeper look at how many kids are on the bus as well.
Carolyn, go ahead.
Connor, I guess I really didn't even think about the $1.5 million savings. I mean, that's great that we're going to have this savings. But for me, the bigger issue here is our personnel issue. It's our human resource issue, right? It's our issue. It's about taking care of our people, right? And making sure that we don't lose more people because our bus system is operating in crisis. And so for me, it's okay, that we're going to save the $1.5 million, because you asked the question, well, how important is that? Well, I don't know how important it is to everybody in this system, but I know that our human resources are the most important thing, because we're an organization of people. We don't have a product. We have students. We have people in our organization. That is our product. And so we have to take care of our people, or we won't be able to do any of the things that we need to do. We talked earlier about how, our ACE employees are like the glue in our system. And we need to make sure that we're taking care of that, and that we have the employees that we need here to support our system so we can take care of our kids. So for me, it's the human resource part that's really important. It's taking care of our people that feels most important to me, so that we can take care of our kids.
I agree. I think, that I wrote it down even, that turnover rate is so high. Employee retention, on the human resources side. I'm not sure if managing the times is going to solve that problem 100%. Hopefully it will help, because I agree with you. I think the incentives to get more drivers into the system, because one of the things I said in my notes here is, does this problem go away if we have 200 drivers? Do we even talk about switching times if we could find out a way to get 200 drivers in the driver pool? Right? And I agree with you 100%. I don't want to see any undue burden be put on the drivers and the people who work in the motor pool as well. That $1.5 million of savings, as Jim said, is a lot of money as well.
I believe that actually Brian wants to jump in for just a moment.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
One, I want to thank the board and the community for their deep level of engagement on this important topic. And as Director Duffy was just talking about trust, I think it's important that, as he kind of charged us, that the general community doesn't yet fully understand. We have a highly educated community, but we're continuing to need to inform people on the impacts of how COVID has impacted our community, how housing prices have impacted our community, cost of living increases have impacted our community just over the last 4 to 5 years. In preparation for our presentation tonight, having a chance to go back and look at the presentation from 4 or 5 years ago and look at the context that was presented at that particular time, we were experiencing actually a growth in enrollment at that time. We had 13,000 bus riders 4 to 5 years ago instead of the 9,000 that we have today. The cost of running a route at that time was $60,000 in compared to today's $80,000. So the charge that we have collectively as a leadership community is to continue to engage the community thoughtfully on the changing context that we're continuing to deal with in this particular space, as well as every other sector of the organization, which is the reason that we're here today, both with that urgency, but also understanding that it is an impact on families. And I just thought it was important to kind of go back in time and recognize that context that was shared is quite different today.
Thank you, Brian. Jeff, you had something you wanted to say too?
Just one thing I would add in response to Connor's excellent comments was that is exactly how we wanted to phrase the survey, which is the choice isn't, would you like the district to save some money and, retain employees better? The choice that a parent needs to make is can you live with the bell time or run the risk of not having a bus at all? Because that's the situation we're trying to present, right? That's the real choice that you have to make. And so not to be overly dire about it, but to be realistic about what the actual choice is that we're asking parents to make. All the rest of it is just all the good that we're trying to do to keep the system running.
Go ahead, Kevin.
One final thought. I appreciate the discussion that we're having here too, but I want to also focus on something that might be a little more fundamental, and I'll do it by way of anecdote. When I was teaching in New Orleans at an alternative school, there was a student who I won't use his real name, but I'll say Mr. Williams was a great student, and then one day he just stopped showing up to school. And so I asked around, I said, why isn't he coming? He's a good student. I mean, he got kicked out for nonsense, but he was a good student of mine. Oh, he got himself kicked off the bus for a fight or something, and so he just stopped coming to school. And so I called home, and I talked to him, and he said, yeah, I have no way of getting to school. So I decided to drive 30 minutes out of my way. I didn't have kids at that point. I was single, and I could do it. 30 minutes there and back to drive him to school. Otherwise, he had no way of getting to school. He has no money to get on the public transportation. It was his one way of getting to school. Now, that's something this isn't a story about how cool I am as a teacher, but I think more importantly, there are kids in our district that, if not but for the bus, they're not getting to school. We're talking about adults having conversations in their households about how we're going to juggle our schedules, et cetera, as if there's some people that don't have that luxury. And so by reducing it to something that simple about student access to education, to me, it's inexcusable, like you said, President Draper, to not offer transportation to kids who need it the most. Will it be uncomfortable? Will it be painful? Yes, I'm sure it will. I think messaging is important. I think communication is important. I don't think, to me, it's as complex as not being allowed to offer a student a way to get to school. And I'll stop pontificating, but I want to make it that clear.
And I will jump onto that high horse and and just reiterate what you had said earlier, Jim. With 1/3 of our students ride the bus, and it's, we're talking. Carolyn, you mentioned we're talking about attendance rates, and so if we can't provide busing for those students every 8th day, I would predict that every 8th day we will have low attendance rates for those particular kiddos, and that's not something that we want to see. It's not something that we want to experiment with, because I think that would be a failed experiment. That said, too, what I want to go back to how we started this day off, which was celebrating our bus drivers who saved a life and knew the family and knew the child and knew that the child that was not, their behavior was off, and they knew that. And what we're providing here is that safety, that level of knowledge of the students that come onto the bus. And okay, Lucas is not acting like himself. What's going on here? How can I help? What do I need to do? And they have the training, and they have the safety experience, and they have all of that background to know exactly what to do, to call in and save a life. And this is what we need to be looking at. So you've got not only are we saving $1.5 million, yes, are we changing times? Is that a difficulty? Yes, it is. And I will say that I'm not thrilled about the earlier middle school start times, because we did do so much research into why it is better to start after 8 o'clock for middle schoolers. And that said, I want to be able to provide that safety for those students who are riding the bus to know their bus driver, for the bus driver to know the student, for them to have that consistency throughout. So, like I said, I'm not thrilled about the earlier start time for middle school, and I was a part of that discussion from 5 years ago about doing later bell times. That was unfortunately 5 years ago, could have been 15 at this point. It was so long and far away, long ago and far away. And I don't want to have to go to the stop busing. I don't want to have to go to do that. It is absolutely not equitable. And that is what other districts are doing, and they're doing it here in northern Colorado. So I think that this one-time change, this 1 year change, saving us $1.5 million, I think that's something that we'll need to do. And we'll readjust it once the steering committee has made its recommendations. And I agree with Jess. I think it's wise that we discuss and openly and have these conversations about some guiding principles for the transportation. So, putting our guiding principles out that we would like middle school, high school to start later, and elementary to start earlier. With the boundary changes, what is that going to look like? Do we have to look at distances? Do we have to look at length of time on a bus? Do we have to look at, there are, various other things that we can be looking at. And that is something that we can do for 25, 26. And it's not something that we can do for now. Anybody else have anything they would like to add? All right. So with that, Jeff and Desiree, thank you so much for all your hard work on this. I know that this took tremendous lift for you both to go ahead and do this, to bring it to the board, to get it down to just these two options. Thank you so much. I am excited to see what the public wants to tell us about various options A and options B. So thank you so much.
Thank you.